Hello, everybody. Hello.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good. Good. Good to see you
Yeah,
again.
good to see you too. I feel like we just did
Yeah,
this, but they
a
didn't need
while
to know
ago.
that. I didn't have to tell them
Yeah.
that.
Oh
Well,
man, here we are.
yeah, I'm excited that you're here. To everybody who's clicking on and joining, this is Luke LeFevre,
Hello,
and
and hello.
he's awesome. Um, we're super excited to have him pour into our creative Christian group tonight. And
Yeah.
for whoever else is watching, just God bless the extra. Come on in.
Cool. Well, it's awesome to be here. I was telling Jenny earlier today, this is actually my very first Instagram live, which she was like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, I haven't done this a bunch of times, so this is the first one. So I'm excited to be here. Excited to talk about what you guys are doing in this challenge too."
Yeah, I definitely thought you were the pro. So I was like, oh, wow. Okay. So we're both learning today. That's amazing. We love that. Yeah. So we talked a little bit before, but just for people watching, we're doing a creative challenge all month of January. It's the Creative Christian is the ministry. So anybody who is a creative knows they're a creative, or hey, for those people who don't and doubt, I had so many conversations after we talked earlier today at a coffee shop with people who were like, well, I don't feel like I'm a creative, but I
Yeah.
know I am. So
Yeah.
for those people, this talk will definitely be for you, and you can come on and join the challenge. It's free. It's just a way for us to all like come together, join together as a community, and press after God for like what He's called us to do with our lives. Because it's hard to do that by yourself, for sure.
Right. So what did the people at the coffee shop say? So they were just like, they didn't want to admit it or what? Because I've been thinking about that a lot lately too.
Well, I think I shared with you like several people who are already in the challenge were like, well, I wasn't going to join because I don't really feel like I'm creative enough.
Yeah.
And that's
No.
kind of the thing is like, I might be creative, but I'm not creative
Yeah.
enough. And so one of them, it was a girl, she's a photographer. She might be watching. So hi, if you are. She has had her own photography business for like 8 years.
Yeah.
That's her full-time gig. I mean, that's impressive. That's amazing.
Yeah.
But she's like, I just don't feel like I'm creative enough. So we pull up her website and I'm like, look at this. Your logo is like watercolor painting. You have like, she just shot a wedding in Maui. Like, I was like, girl, you're
Yeah.
killing it.
It's happening.
But I think kind of the mindset comes in of like, I'm just doing a job. Maybe
Yeah.
like my creative stuff became my job. For me, that's
Yeah.
teaching music. Like that just became a way to pay the bills.
Yeah.
And I think God really wants to open our eyes, and this is part of the challenge, to the work that He has in it for us. That is what He's created
Yeah.
us to do. So,
I love that.
yeah.
Yeah. I was talking to somebody the other day and we got in the car and we were driving together and we were just talking, getting to know each other. I didn't know him that well. And over the course of that car ride, we get to the juice place, and he goes, "Well, I'm sorry I wasn't listening to exactly what you were saying because I was noticing every song on the radio that was playing because that's what I think about all the time is music." And so we started talking, and he was like, "I write this newsletter. I love writing about music. I love telling and introducing people to new music, and I do this thing." And he just kept saying all these things that were having a pull inside of him towards writing about music, about being a part of music. And I was like, dude, everything you're saying is telling me you're a creative. And he's like, oh, no, 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 no. I don't know about that. And I go, what do you mean? And he goes, well, I love this author and this author and this author, and I'm nothing like
Mm.
them. And I was like, oh, man, you cannot do that. You can't compare that. If you have something inside of you that you have to get out in some way and you're doubting it, that means you're a creative, especially if you're doubting
Yeah.
it.
Part of the gift.
Part of the disease, yeah.
Yeah. Um, that was definitely me growing up. I loved reading like Oscar Wilde and Ernest
Really?
Hemingway, but I would like stop reading their books halfway through. I'm like, this is just, it's over my head. I want to understand it because I know I should.
Yeah.
And I'll never be like them, so I'm not a writer, you know.
Yeah,
I get that. Well, cool. Can you kind of tell everybody, give them your little bio, your elevator speech, whatever it is, you know,
sure.
tell us who is Luke.
Luke is I'm 44, if people care about ages. I have 4 kids. We live in Nashville, Tennessee, just south of Nashville, Tennessee. Me and Mandy, my wife, we've been married for 23 years, so a little while now.
Awesome.
And I have been a creative professionally for over 20 years. Started as a designer, making brochures and websites and all that stuff at the beginning of the 2000s, and then eventually got to be a senior designer at Dave Ramsey's company, Ramsey Solutions, in 2008, and slowly just kept messing with things, and eventually, I mean, I'll tell more of this story here in a little bit, but I got to be the chief creative officer. I was on the board there, and the team I led by the end was about 130 to 150 people of writers, designers, video editors, project managers,
Wow.
and all that crew. And we had a bunch of different creative directors leading different parts of that amazing business. And I just felt a pull over this last couple of years to really continue to help creatives believe they have what it takes to go after and follow where God is pulling them. And when I say creatives, I do mean the painters, the writers, the designers. I do mean those folks, but I also mean the person who wants to start a business, or the mom who wants to have a baby, or the family who wants to adopt. Like, you have those pulls inside of you towards something that God wants to create with you. And oftentimes we just push that away or say, oh, I can't do that. But you can, and you can at least start down that path. And so I started a business and a ministry about a year and a half ago to figure out how to help more people do this. And so that's what Holy Work is all about. And I can tell you that story too, if you want to jump there right now or whatever you'd like.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Just for everybody watching, Luke has definitely a proven track record in our whole thing that we're talking about of being crazy and following the God calling on your life and just like not doing the conventional thing for forever.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd love for you to kind of tell the story that you shared about
Yeah.
that and how that became the holy work. And
Yeah. So it really started. I mean, when I was a little kid, obviously, I was drawn to writing, and I tried to write a novel when I was in high school, and I loved reading and all that stuff. But the Holy Work thing really started from a place of discontentment, honestly. It was 2001. I had just gotten married, got my first job, and started commuting to be this designer at a little agency. And I got that first job, and I hated it. I felt like I was just a cog in a machine. And I would come home and talk to my wife, Mandy, and I would just be like, this is not what it's supposed to be. And she didn't understand. She was a teacher and she loved that. And she didn't understand why I was so discontent. And I wasn't seeking God in my life. I wasn't actively trying to see what he wanted. I would say I was a Christian. I went to a little Christian school and a little Christian college, but I was just a discontent person. I had some addictions. I was not healthy. I was overweight. And I did that for 5 years, from 2001 to 2005. You ask my wife, and she would be like, oh my gosh, Luke hated his jobs and just all this kind of stuff. But in 2006, a pastor came to the church I was going to, and he said, I dare you to ask God to rock your world. And I remember thinking, okay, well, that I can do. And if he's real, he'll do something. But if not, maybe it's time to move on. Maybe this isn't real at all, because I'm not a content person. And so I got a new Bible, and I always joke that I bought that Bible and I added it to the stack I already had because this one was going to work. And I wrote a note in the front of it that said, God, I dare you to rock my world. I look forward to seeing what happens. And it wasn't like lightning struck or anything, but slowly over time, he started to change my heart. And one of the ways he changed it is, as I was being a designer, I had to work on a bunch of products that I didn't necessarily care about. I'm sure if we have some creatives on here, they have to design things they don't necessarily care about. But I had to work on sprinkler brochures sometimes and salon chair brochures and things like that. And I just was belly aching about it all the time. And I was also at the time in a band. And I thought the band was just going to take off. I thought that's how God was going to rock my world. And um, as I had to make a poster one day for the band, and so I worked all morning on the sprinkler brochure, and just was like, "Oh, this sucks." And then I get to lunchtime, and I'm like, "Ooh, cool! I get to make a poster." So I run out, I take a picture of a building, uh, I make a cool poster, I put some text on it, and I get back to my desk. I make the poster, and I thought it was fun. It looked cool, and but then 1 o'clock comes and hits. And I'm like, oh, I got to work on that stupid sprinkler brochure again. And what happened is when I sat down, I just felt this little sense that was, hey, what if you tried as hard on your sprinkler brochure as you did your band poster? And I was like, well, okay, what would I do if I really tried hard on the sprinkler brochure? And so I made what I thought looked cool, would look cool. And I tried hard on this thing, and I actually enjoyed it, and the client liked it, and it actually helped me. And I was like, okay. So I tried that on the next one, and I tried that on the next one. And so what really has started to happen after I said, God, will you rock my world, is I started to embrace where I was at and do the best with what I had there. And then some more opportunities came. And so I think a lot of young creatives, I'll keep going to the story, but we'll kind of pause here. A lot of young creatives want the thing that's way here. They want to be the painter who's making money from their painting, or they want to be the writer who's making money from the writing, or they want to be the creative director, or whatever it is. And so they bellyache or complain about the place they're at now. But I think God is actually teaching you how to do the thing one day you might be able to do, but He's preparing you for it. And so the key is to really embrace where you're at now so that you can do what you need to do later. So this is just the beginning of it, and I'll pause there if you have any questions about any of that.
No, I think it's good. I just say, like, scripturally, it's totally biblical. Unfortunately, it's not the fun.
Yeah.
It's not
And
the fun road.
why don't we do it? You know, it's like we want to complain about it the whole, at least I do,
Yeah.
complain the whole time.
I remember when I worked at like a design agency, and I told you earlier, it was super unhealthy. The lady was like throwing stuff at me, calling me names, and one point I was pulling weeds out of her garden, and I was just belly aching to the Lord, like, Jesus, do you see what she has me doing? And it was like God was like, can you do it like to the best of your ability? And I was like, well, no, I might leave a weed here because I'm mad. Like,
Right. And He's just waiting for us to get it.
Yeah. And God so honors that honesty, though. I think, like, when you're able to be honest and surrender that, and like you're saying, be faithful with little so God can make you faithful with much.
And honestly, that's when, once I started to embrace where I was at, that's when more opportunities started to come. I started to have some more favor at work. I was embracing that thing. And that's when the job at Ramsey popped up. And I was listening to Dave's show, and I was hooked. Me and Mandy were getting out of debt. We were following the steps, and listening to the show. I'm enjoying my work. And all of a sudden, one day, he goes, he had a guy call in and said, well, what do you do for a living? And the guy was like, well, I can't find a job. And Dave goes, well, what do you do? And he goes, I'm an engineer. And Dave goes, well, we don't need engineers around here. We need some graphic designers. And I was like, really? And so I applied, and that's how I got the job there. And like I said, I just we moved our family down from Illinois into Nashville and started this role here. And over the course of those 15 years, I started to get more favor, and eventually, like I said, was leading the whole team. But at the beginning, about a year after I started, I'd moved my family. We brought a bunch of, we changed our whole lives. And I was like, all right, I'm going to do this. And I'm going to be a designer at this place and focus on this. I started to get that discontent feeling again. And I was just like, what is this? And what is the problem? And I honestly, sadly, didn't look at myself yet. And I started to blame my wife. And I said, well, she must be the problem. We've just been together too long. We got married too young, like all that kind of stuff. And I started to really contemplate ending our marriage. And I remember I was out for a run, and it was 2010. I'm out for a run, and I'm really thinking like, oh my gosh, what if I actually play this out? She might move back to Illinois. And I was really, I was crying and running, and all of a sudden I felt on my whole person kind of like a smack. And I felt the words. I didn't hear them, but I felt them, and it just said, "Be still and know that I'm God." And so I like was shocked out of my stupor or whatever that was, and I finished my run and I got home, and I was like, God, was that you? Like, is this what people talk about? And um, if that was you, then that means you're real. And if you're real, well, maybe what this Bible says is true. And I remember this verse that said, "The truth will set you free." And so I was like, well, I'm just going to tell Mandy everything. I'm going to write her a letter. And so I wrote her this note, and I just wrote out all these things I didn't want to, never wanted to admit, and just told her the truth about everything. And um, she, uh, I read it to her, and I said, but I think a lot of these thoughts I'm having are distorted, and I'm in to fight for this if you are. And she said, I'm in to fight for this. And so we started fighting for our marriage, and I started telling her the truth, and she started telling me the truth. And what that did is it made our marriage better. And so then I started saying, well, if I'm telling her the truth and that relationship gets better, what if I started telling God the truth? And so that's when I started journaling, and I started writing a lot more. And I had been a designer, and I had written songs for my band and things like that, but I hadn't been an intentional writer. And writing her the truth led me to write God the truth, and started me down this path of journaling. And I started writing out my thoughts, and what I thought about things, what I felt about things. And I did that for about 5 years before I even told anybody any of that story. And about 2015, I started to I had a bunch of favorite work. I was in a leadership position, and I was writing every day, at least to God. I wasn't always sharing it, but then I'd share stuff with my team, and I'd share stuff with different people, and it would resonate with them, and it helped them. And I was like, I wonder if there's something here. I wonder if there's a book here, or a curriculum, or a class, or like, God, what do you want me to do with this? And over the next 8 years of writing and leading a team, and working through stuff, I eventually was like, I want to write a book about this stuff, and I want to help people learn this pattern that I've found. And what I uncovered through my writing and through different things was this path to finding and following your holy work. And so I'll walk you through that path here in a second. But the thing during that period where I was reading the Bible and I was journaling and writing what I actually thought about it was in Exodus 31. It's when Moses is at the top of a mountain, and he's getting the instructions for the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant. And it says, God says to Moses, I have filled with the Spirit a man named Bezalel and his helper Oliab with all kinds of knowledge and wisdom and craft and all this stuff. And I read that verse, and then in the commentary below that Bible, it said, the first person the Bible mentions as being filled with the Spirit was this guy Bezalel. And I was like, what? The first person mentioned being filled with the Spirit was a creative? God wanted to create something with this guy, and he filled him with the Spirit to do it. And so I started talking to the creatives I knew and the creatives around, and asking if they had heard about this, and they hadn't. But it really started to inspire me to be like, no, being a creative is an honor, and it's something we get to do with God, and He wants to create something with us, in us, and through us. And so I started writing and talking about that, and I'll walk you through the path, the Holy Work path here in a second. But I'll stop there and pause and see if you have any thoughts or questions about any of that
You
I
know,
just said.
what came to mind was I read that same passage about Moses and actually, it was about the Ten Commandments. And it says Moses fasted for 40 days. So I want to encourage all of our creatives who are in the challenge. This week we're
Uh,
fasting. Come
uh,
on, you might get a Ten
yeah,
Commandments kind of piece of
yeah,
work, you know?
that's right.
But no, I think it's so great. I do remember when I read that for the first time, but I never heard anybody talk
Yeah,
about it. And yeah, even like after I read it, I was like, man, I want to. So when I discovered you and you talked about that, I was like, whoa, wait,
yeah,
what? Someone
yeah,
else knows that. So so
yeah.
cool.
And there isn't that many people talking about it, and I'm not sure why. I think it's an amazing thing, and so I guess that's what we're supposed to talk about, right, Jenny?
Yeah. Yes. Yes, 100%.
Oh man, there's a little cool story. When I did first start talking about it, one of the authors that I did find that was talking about it is a guy named Jordan Rayner, and he has a book that's called to Create. And so in 2015, when I found out he had written some about it, I emailed him and I was just like, "Hey man, this is really cool. I'm the creative director at Ramsey, and I just want to encourage you, keep going. You know, it's awesome." And he responded back and said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so grateful for your email. I'm going to take it as a sign that I'm going to keep going in what I'm doing because just 2 days ago, I left my job as a CEO to pursue this entrepreneurs who are Christians calling that he has."
Wow.
Yeah, and so we've become friends over this last few years. And actually, he sent me his. I don't have it here, but he sent me his latest book, and I read it, and it is amazing. It's so good.
You know
Yeah,
what's crazy about that? So my friend, we like he was already grown up, but I grew up in ministry with
yeah.
him, and he is a Christian entrepreneur in the design world. And he went to, gosh, I don't know, the thing that he did for Christian entrepreneurs recently.
Okay.
And he's in a group for that under him. So I was like, hey, would you want to come on the live and talk? I had no idea he did any of this. And I was like, the challenge is called Called to Create. And he just died laughing. He's like, do you know who Jordan
Yeah.
Rainier is? And I was
Yeah.
like, no, I think I've heard that name, but I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. That's him.
Yeah.
That. Oh, it's so
And
good.
you have a book. You should probably share
I
about
don't
that, huh?
have it
Oh,
yet. I'm working on it. Like
okay.
I'm actually building a business and just starting to talk about this because if you write a book and you have nobody to give it to or sell it to, what's the point, you know?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
and then how do we make an income in the meantime to support my family and things like that? But
Well,
the book will
you
eventually come out.
when you
Hopefully in
figure that out, let me know because I just finished my first book and I'm just, like talking to people and I'm like, how
yeah,
do we do this? What do we do here?
right. But the path I wanted to talk about is this. So I think creatives, I think everyone, but I think creatives are most open to it. The path that I kind of figured out is all creatives have some sort of pull inside of them. That is oh, you can't see it. I'm going to move this right here.
Perfect.
They have some sort of pull that is, I want to create something. And it could be, like I was saying earlier, a painting, a book. It might just be I want to start posting on social and express myself in some way in that regard. Or it could be something bigger, like starting a business, starting a family. There is this internal pull that we have. And oftentimes that pull gets distorted because God isn't a part of the story. And so we try to do things to satisfy this pull that often feels like restlessness or a feeling of being stuck or a feeling of just a stirring that we don't know what to do with. That pull is God. And the second part of this path is the proof. And this is where we really talk about and explore your story and what God put in you as a kid and where he started pulling you way back then. Before you were born, he had a plan and he's putting little guideposts, little clues along the way, showing you the way. Like I said, for me, I could draw pretty well when I was younger. I loved reading. I wanted to write a novel. Those things are are a part of your story. Other people have things like math. They were always drawn to math. I had a friend, yeah, me neither, but I had a friend who I was telling him this story, and he was like, "Oh man, I remember being in a Pizza Hut when I was little, and the menu was out there, and I looked at the prices, and I looked at the pizzas, And he goes, Dad, he asks his dad, he goes, Dad, how much does it cost to make a pizza? And his dad goes, I don't know, probably like $2. But he looked at the menu and it said 10. And he just goes, business. Like he understood how that worked. And
Wow.
that was something he was drawn to. And I never had those thoughts. I was like, well, what color is the menu? You know, that's what I was thinking about. But so you look at your story and the proof that God put it there. And I think another form of the proof is to remember what I already talked about, but we need to hammer it in. It is no coincidence that the first person mentioned as being filled with the Spirit is a creative. And the fifth word of the Bible is in the beginning, God created. And then he made man in his image.
Yeah.
And the only thing we know about his image at that point is that he is a creator.
Yeah.
That's the only thing we know. And so we start and we really explore the proof that God put something inside of you that he wants to make with you, through you, and in you. So the next step is kind of what I talked about already with the journaling is the practices. And the practices are the acts of daily seeking God and daily building in some connection with him so that you're making the right choices, so that the Holy Spirit is actually guiding you. So when you start to follow, you believe it's him, you're now actively seeking him each day. Once you start following that pull and you make a step out to where you're like, okay, I'm going to believe this is God and I'm going to start creating something, or I'm going to start moving towards that adoption, or I'm going to start moving towards this, you will immediately hit the war, which means there is an enemy that is out there and he doesn't want you to do any of these things. He wants you to stop. He doesn't just want you to stub your toe, though. He wants to kill, steal, and destroy. And he will immediately hit you with fear. He will hit you with internal voices, external voices, and then just general resistance where your car runs out of gas, or you show up late to the meeting, or you accidentally sleep in, or you get lazy. Like fear is, who am I to do this? I'll never be good enough to do this, so I'm not going to do it. Voices are some voices from your past that said, uh, you can't make any money doing that. Don't do that. But it's not about money. It's about something different. And so following that, but that is the war. And that immediately comes next. And after the war, and this isn't after, actually, I shouldn't say after, the war is constant. Like it never stops. And then next up is the wilderness. So you start following, you fight through the war, you acknowledge the war, and then you just get the glory of the wilderness, which is where you have to clean up some messes, you have to learn some new things, you have to act, and you got to learn patience. And the wilderness, another word for wilderness is work. We should just call it work. Because if you think about the only difference between a city and a wilderness is work. Someone got a machete out and made a path. And then somebody else dropped down some gravel. And then and then somebody put down some pavement. But it takes work, and the path from going from wilderness to a city isn't a quick process. And so the wilderness is where you're really formed. And that could be 6 months, that could be 20 years, it could be a lifetime. But if we know where we're at and we know we're following, we will be clear about the wilderness. I mean, the Israelites are the most obvious example. They were out there for 40 years. They would not have been ready to go in the promised land if they would have been dropped in there right away. They wouldn't have been able to handle the giants. They wouldn't have been able to know what to do. So after the wilderness, you get a threshold, probably many thresholds. And this is where you have decisions, really hard decisions that you have to make. Sometimes you have to do some hard things. There will eventually be a threshold you have to cross. If you think about it like boiling water, I forget what the exact temperature of boiling water is, 100 and something. and somebody on the chat can put it in there. But if it's 1 degree lower than that, it won't boil. If it goes above that, it will boil. And that is the threshold that we all eventually will cross when we're like, I've had it. I'm going to go after this. I know God is pulling me, and I'm going to make a decision to do it. And sometimes we make that decision ourselves, and other times we get fired or we get divorced or something happens to force us into that. But ultimately, you end with purpose. And going from the pull to the purpose is a long and winding journey, but I think ultimately that path is holy work. And that is where you're transformed in that process. It's not about just making a painting or writing a book. It's about what God is doing in you, because you are his piece of art. You're his work. And he has, like C.S. Lewis says, he's not going to stop forming you until he gets you just right. And all of that is just this over and over and over again. And so that is the holy work path that I work with people through. And where do you think you are on this, Jenny?
I think I've had a threshold, but back in the wilderness. You know?
Yeah.
Man, I just think it's so good. I feel like now's the point where we should say, and for $39.99, you can sign up for the holy work over and over and over and over.
Right.
But actually, it's free of charge with the Lord. So just cost your life. You can lay it down, you know?
Yes, exactly. That's great.
But yeah, I so appreciate you sharing that. I actually had dinner with one of our pastors who's one of the most amazing creatives I know tonight, and was telling them about our conversation and about the holy work. And I said, I loved it because I love a process. I love a system. I love when you can put something on a whiteboard and I can understand it. And I think for people who are creative and who don't press in to do that work with the Lord, you can get so lost. You know, the weight of your calling, it can seem so big. I remember the Lord telling me I was called to bring biblical truth to the entertainment industry. What does that mean? You know, what does that mean? And so, like, really humbling yourself to do the spiritual disciplines, to do the nitty gritty work, to invite people into your life and say, here's what I think God's telling me. What do you think? Am I crazy? You know, do I go after this? Do I say yes to this opportunity? Because you had mentioned the Israelites not being ready to enter the promised land. And I feel like as creatives, sometimes the way the enemy comes against you in the war is, here's this great opportunity that's way too soon. And it looks attractive and it seems like everything you've ever dreamed of, but your character isn't going to be able to sustain you in it. And so I think that committing to the holy work, I'm going to use that phrase forever, and I promise I'll give you credit, but so important, you know?
Yeah. I think also it's interesting. Tell me what you think about this. When you do get some of those opportunities, sometimes, you have to say no to them because it's not actually in the calling. So I'm feeling like I want to talk more about this and help people through it. But there has been some opportunities that have come up over this last year that would actually make my life a whole lot easier, you know? But it's not right. It's not time yet. And sometimes when you're going through that, you have to make those choices and be like, no, I'm going to stick with this because I feel like God's telling me to stay, or he's telling me not to jump, or any of those. I mean, it's tough. And that's where the practices are so important, to be connecting with him every day. How does the war manifest itself for you?
It's a great question. I definitely think one distraction to take you out of those daily walking with the Lord. I think for me, I am a person that would like to do it by myself. I would like to be self-sufficient, independent. And so really this past year has been like let's remember, like, let's take another course, and we need to walk daily with the Lord, because that's the point. Like, the reason things come up in your life, it's not always the devil. Sometimes it's God. Like, for sure. Sometimes he's throwing it at you because he wants to pull you closer. And sometimes it isn't him, but he'll use it. And so I think I heard somebody say this the other day. The temptation that Satan faced and succumbed to was to be famous, to be more famous than God, right? And so we have that same temptation, I think, as Christ followers in general, but especially as people who have gifts that put them on platforms, or gifts that put them in the spotlight. You have that temptation to, I want to exalt my name. I want to do this so I get noticed. And so one of the things that when I went into ministry school, my pastor said, you need to stop doing immediately, was acting. And I was devastated, because it was, it was like my childhood dream. I'd finally gotten to do it. And he was like, Jen, we're at a funeral. We were at a funeral. He was leading the funeral. We're sitting in the seats and we're talking, there's like maybe a slideshow on or something. Yeah. He's like, Jen, what I think you really need to do right now is give up acting. And I'm like, boy, this funeral is very, very symbolic, because you are killing my dreams. Like, oh, wow. But he's like a dad. He can talk to me like that, So, but yeah, I did give it up. And what I found out was I didn't know who I was. Yeah. And I was pretending to be somebody else every time I got on that stage. And it was hurting me. And I wasn't doing it for the right reasons, right? Like, why do I believe now God would like me to act? Because there's people I'm doing that with who need him, Yeah.
That's fascinating. And I'm curious how this plays out for you over this next bit of your life, because I think some of those dreams are there, and they do need to be redeemed and changed, but it doesn't mean the dream is off. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that, I've wrestled with that for a long time, because I loved the thought of acting as well. I think it just feels very expressive, and you can just become someone else for a little bit. But there is also, like, as a kid, this dream, and then how it needs to change. And maybe, you're ready now and you can handle it, and you wouldn't have been able to handle it before. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I remember actually in like a young adults Bible study, like one of my first like Bible studies I really dived into, and our small group leader was a friend, a little bit older, and he was like, what do you guys feel like you're called to do with your life? And I was not, I wasn't seeking God about that. It was just an impression. And I said, I believe God is calling. He wants to make me famous so I can share his love with people. And that guy laughed in my face. He laughed and laughed, and he said, that is just your selfish ambition. Oh, and
I don't know.
And I was like, okay. So then later I was like in the supermarket, and I'm looking at Hello Magazine or something, and Adele's on the cover. And I was like, God, why would you want to make me famous? And he said, because you will share my love with people. Yeah. And so I just was like, you know what? I'm just going to put that on the back burner. Yeah. And if it's going to happen, God, you're going to do it. Yeah. And let me tell you, I don't go around telling people that ever. This is probably the first time in 10 years I've said it. But it's not like I've got to be famous, or I've got to, it's hey, cool. That'd be a cool benefit, I guess, like, of what you want to do with my life, Lord. But yeah, and I've learned too, like, I used to want to lead worship so bad. Yeah. And I had a mentor, and she was the captain of our prayer team, and we would do intercessory prayer during church. And we'd be on our knees, crying, praying for the congregation. And one day she was like, Jen, have you asked God why he hasn't released you to lead worship? And I was like, no, because I don't want to know. Like, I didn't want to know. And she's like, I want you to do that. And so I did. And God told me, I haven't allowed you to do that because you've made it about you. Yeah. And I was like, oh, and I just like repented, and I was so grieved. So I go back and I tell her that. And she told me, Jen, you're actually way too like gifted. Like God has given you too many things to do for you to just focus on that one thing.
Yeah.
And that really changed things for me too, because I wouldn't be doing
Yeah.
this, you know, I'd be like,
Yeah.
no, I'm leading worship. Oh,
Yeah.
that's what I'm doing, you know?
Yeah.
So
You're just you got the disease of the creative, like where you like all of
I'm
it. You
infected.
know, my daughter, she, I mean, all my kids are super creative, but my daughter's 17 and she loves making films. She loves writing songs. She's like, so do I have to decide? And I'm like, no, you do not have to decide. You got to pick a direction just to keep learning about some stuff, but you don't have to decide. Just keep going. And I think creatives, there's so many people with good intentions, and I love those mentors in your life. But oftentimes, mentors, I, this may or not be true. I don't know. This is just what I think. Oftentimes, especially mentors to a creative person, say that's silly
Mm,
or something like that. Now it sounds like those folks had a good heart and they were like really pushing you to seek God in it versus just yourself. And I think that's powerful. But oftentimes, especially Christians, we push down things we want. And
mm,
I I know that gets dicey, but like if you want to be an actor or you want to write songs or you want to write a book, we often think, well, I need to lose my life to save it. And you do. But also pay attention to those desires you have because God put those things there. And
yeah.
the Bible said Jesus lives in your heart
Mm,
if you've accepted him. So can't we trust that voice we have? You know, I know humans are flawed and we need to be saved, but also the Holy Spirit lives there now, and that's the temple. And if you have something you just continually feel pulled that you want to do, that's Him giving you a restless stirring to follow.
mm,
Do it. Go after it. At least start the path because what it will do is it will transform you in the process. And you'll turn into the creation He wants. And in the process, you will show Him to a whole lot more
yeah.
people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would affirm that. I think that where one person might have not done a great job, there were five other
Yeah.
pastors who really encouraged. And one is a really good friend of mine. He was our worship and youth pastor at the time. And he's the first person who told me, Jen, like Christians should be the most
Yeah.
creative people. We should be leading the forefront of creativity because we were made in God's image
Yeah.
and he's a creator, right? And I was like, dang,
Yeah.
you're right. And all these Christian movies suck. Like, you
Yeah.
know, and I was like, we need to do better.
Yeah.
But he's also the person that so when I was in ministry school, I'd be like getting dreams and I'd be like, God's telling me to do this. And I'd be so excited. And I was telling him, you know, I feel like God's calling me to write a musical about my testimony and you know I'm gonna act in it and da da da. And he was
Yeah.
like, Jen, I think you can write it, direct it, act in it, and be in the
Yeah.
audience. Like he just was like
Right.
cheering me on, you
Right.
know. But he really, like when I told him, hey, this is what God has told me my calling is. He said, Jen, I don't think it could be more right,
Yeah.
like what you're saying. And so
That's cool.
I just encourage people, like as you're seeking God, as you're hearing from Him, take that to
Yeah.
trusted people, take that to the Bible, you
Yeah.
know, like, because if my calling was like, oh, you're just going to be famous, and there
Right.
was no other, it's not from God, or you're missing something, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. That's great. And I just think about, okay, will this transform me in the process? You know, what do I need to be learning as I'm going through this? But I think you can trust some of those things for him to redeem in the process. And there's I'm really impressed with some of the latest creative stuff that's coming out. Andy Irwin's movies, I think, are great. He's the guy who did Jesus Revolution, and like his stuff's great. Dallas Jenkins stuff is great, and I think it's moving in the right direction because people are being honest and real, and
Yes.
so I think there's some great stuff happening. And then there's people like you doing these kind of things and Jordan Rayner and what he's writing. I think there's some really cool stuff happening right now and the spirit is moving. So I'm curious, do you ever ask questions to people that are watching?
um well, since this is like the second time I've done it, Yeah, like I asked the first time, like, what's your favorite
Yeah.
ice cream?
Yeah. I
And that came back to bite me in the butt because like way later in the video we were talking about fasting, but someone joined late and
yeah.
they said their favorite ice cream, and I was like, "That's what you're fasting? Is ice
Yeah.
cream?"
Well, I would just be like, hey, anybody who heard the process being written is like, where do you think you fall? Is it in the war or the wilderness or where? So if you just want to put that into the comments, do it. I'd love to see what you guys think.
See, look, it's your first time and you're already a pro. You're like, drop it in the comments.
Well, I've done lots of talks and things on the internet, but I didn't know what buttons to push on the Instagram to make it do this.
Yeah. I tried to send this. If you saw me like a little distracted, someone messaged me and they're like, "Hey, send me the link for the live." And I'm like, "Well, you're on Facebook and it's on Instagram." And I was like, "What's your Instagram?" So I messaged it to them and they sent me a screenshot and it's just blank.
Uh,
And I'm like, "I don't know. I'll send it to you after. I'm so
I'm trying
sorry."
to do it right now. I can't help you.
I
Yeah.
know. I know. Well,
Uh,
yeah, and it's a good time if anybody has any questions. Oh, Brenna. Okay.
the war.
This can I put her on blast for a minute?
Sure.
Um Brenna is the first creative that I've discipled. And actually, we met in theater.
Cool.
She came to church, gave her life to Jesus, everything changed. And I was talking to her after we talked today, and you mentioned adoption, and she's literally in the process of
Oh, wow.
adopting. And I was like, how cool is that? Like, that's a
Yeah.
creative thing. Like,
Cool. Yeah. No, it absolutely is creative, and he's going to transform her in going through this whole process. So it's amazing. So we got it looks like we got two wars in there and a wilderness. Corey Club's a friend of mine on there. That's cool. Josh, I see Josh Lanford in there says the wilderness. Josh, is there there's four parts to the wilderness that I've been talking about. I'm curious if the first one is some things we have to clean up and in order to work through the wilderness. So what I mean by clean up is sometimes we have addictions we need to deal with. Sometimes we have a bunch of debt we need to deal with. I don't know what it is for each person, but there's some things we need to clean up. There's some new things we need to learn, and I'm not sure that's different for every person too. But in the wilderness is where you learn new things. Or is there something you need to act on? It's where we learn to move forward and just start. And then lastly, patience. Sometimes we just have to be patient, and you don't have to answer, Josh, but is one of those, well, I'd love you to if you feel comfortable, but is it something you feel like you need to clean up? Is it something you feel like you need to learn? Is it something you need to act on, or is it time to just be patient? Let me know in the comments if you're still watching. But this
the
has been fun.
yeah, that's a good question for Josh, actually. I'm really glad that you singled him out because we've had some conversations about where he's at. And I think it'd be great, Josh, for you to follow
Yeah.
Luke and get some wisdom from that content. Pretty cool.
Yeah, and if you send me a DM, we can go back and forth on it. It'd
Yeah,
be
he
great.
actually does answer those guys. That's how we got here.
Yeah, real person. It's yeah, I love hearing from
Well,
people.
I was like learning and acting, he
Learning and
said.
acting. Yeah, for sure.
I was telling my pastor, talking to her today, like about I told her like I don't even know how he said yes to this, like what, and I said it really hit me when his executive assistant emailed me, and I was like, oh, you haven't, oh, okay, and we were just DMing, like I didn't even know,
Well, well, what that means is if it's up to me to schedule this thing, I
it's not.
will. It would have been two weeks from now to be like, Thursday. I don't know. And so she's the pro at this, and I think she was on here earlier.
Oh,
So
fun.
she's great. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Molly's her name, right?
Yes,
Thank you,
Molly.
Molly.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I need to get one of those. I need to get to the point where I can have one because I'd be all over the
Yeah.
place. But yeah, hey, before we jump off, I'd love, and I'm putting you on the spot, so feel
Okay.
free to say no. I'd love if you could pray um, for those who are in the challenge, but not just that. As we were kind of talking, you were talking about the spirit moving and the content that's coming out. If we could kind of just pray for the creatives in the world and what's going on. I felt like the Lord was saying there's a revival in creativity right now.
Yeah.
And that a lot of people are coming into like a new age of
Yeah.
that. And
Okay.
so I'd love if you just bless us and pray for us.
I will, but can I read something to everybody listening real quick? And it's just a short little thing. Uh, and I want you to imagine something with me. I want you to imagine God, and he's standing on the coast of California. He's peaceful. He has a little smile on his face. It's one of excitement, anticipation. And he's looking out at this amazing ocean. The view is incredible. Huge waves are crashing into the rocks. The sun is shining down and warming the sand and his face in a way that makes him close his eyes and breathe deeply. He opens his eyes and he looks down at his hand. He's holding a thick rope that fills most of his left hand. He has calluses on this hand from years and years of pulling. As he looks back out at this amazing ocean, he smiles again because he's thinking of someone in particular he wants to join him. You, on the other hand, are standing in New York City. In the middle of Times Square, there's buildings everywhere, people everywhere, noise, lights, billboards all around, and you look down and realize there is a thick rope tied around your waist. Your brow furrows, your head tilts. What is this? I got to get this thing off of me. I have somewhere to be. You try to push it down so you can step out of it, but this thing won't budge. A pull. You feel a slight pull. This thing is trying to pull me. You try to ignore it, and again it slightly pulls, just with slightly more force this time. The rope isn't going away, and you have a choice to make. Am I going to let this pull me? What if I just let go and let the rope pull me? You would have to go through some really tough stuff just to get out of New York City alone. And what if it goes farther than New York? You'd have to go through wilderness and some hills and some mountains and some desert. You'd have to get pulled through the whole country. You'd have storms and desert plains and Nebraska and dark nights and cold mornings, and throughout all of it, you would only have this little rope giving you a tiny bit of hope that you're going somewhere, that through all of this struggle, there is surely someone on the other end pulling. You look down at the rope, it pulls you, and you finally let go. That is what creativity is when you're seeking God. He has something he wants to create with you, in you, and through you. And through the process of that creation, you will be transformed. The Father, I lift up these people watching. I lift up Jenny and the calling you have on her life. And I just pray that you fill anybody who ever sees this thing, or the people here tonight that are seeing this thing, that you fill them with your spirit to know that they are a creation that you are creating at the same time as they are creating, and you want to create with them. So I pray that you just bless everybody's stuff that they're making. I pray that creatives start a revival because they're making things, and I pray that films are made and music is made that points to you in the way that you want it to. So I'm so grateful to be here. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Luke.
You got it.
That was wow. That was a crazy illustration.
Good. Yeah. I love that. I wrote it 3 or 4 years ago. I don't remember writing it, but I know it's there, and so I read it sometimes and felt compelled to read it to you.
Well, thank you.
You got it. Yeah, and I'm grateful to be here. Let's stay in touch.
Yeah. Thank you for blessing us. Have a great night, and we'll see you again.
Okay. See you guys later. Bye.
Bye.